Wondering how your mindset affects your life? How to bring more energy into your business and life? Millions of people around the world ask these same questions daily. You are in the right place. Learn practices that will help give your life the meaning and success you've been searching for. Welcome to the Charge Podcast, teaching you how to create habits around real goals every day. Practical life advice from those who made it. Here's your host, Gary Wilbers.
Welcome, Chargers. We're glad to have you back again this week for another great podcast. Our goal is each week to find different guests with different viewpoints so you can keep learning. Now, the challenge for you is take the learning in, but what action are you going to create? As we get started in this week's podcast, I want to share with you the best thing that you can do to help us is rate and review our podcast and share it with other people that you might think love the Charge podcast. We would truly appreciate that if you would be willing to like and share it and then tell others about it. Thank you for doing that. And let's get into this week's podcast because this week our guest is Jennifer Eggers. She's the founder of LeaderShift Insights. She works with leadership teams facing disruption who want to increase their organizational capacity to adapt so they can emerge stronger and more effective faster. She's a speaker, a coach, and a consultant with a passion for creating personal insights that drive business results. Jennifer is known for facilitating high-stakes meetings with challenging stakeholders. She's the creator of RapidOD, a revolutionary approach to organizational restructuring, and her groundbreaking adaptive leadership workshops have led clients to say, she turns everything you know about corporate training upside down. Jennifer has coached teams, officers, and directors of Fortune 500 companies and is known for helping leaders demonstrate visible leadership fast. She has been a partner with Cambridge Leadership Group and has held several other senior roles in learning, organizational, and leadership development. She's been at Bank of America, AutoZone, Coca-Cola Enterprises, AlliedSignal. Her first book and bestseller, Resilience, It's Not About Bouncing Back, was released this summer, and I had the pleasure of meeting Jennifer this summer. So two great things happened this summer, Jennifer. Congratulations on the book, and welcome to the Charge Podcast.
Thank you so much, Gary. It's great to be here. I'm really excited to be on the show today.
Well, I always tell people I love them to share who Jennifer the person is because, of course, when we do a bio, we do a professional bio, but I love my audience to get to know Jennifer the person because that's who I got to meet this summer.
Sure, absolutely. I started my career in consulting in sort of the dog-eat-dog New York market and found myself running, large transformational projects and coaching executives at like age 24. So I did okay. But I knew I needed, more experience, and I really didn't like the toll those kinds of projects took on people. So I went to work for several large corporations so I could figure out how to come back and make that better. And so a couple things that I learned was that there was too much learning spend on, teaching and training, corporate training with not much to show for it. Strategy was sort of an exercise that not many people's leaders really bought into. Restructuring just took so long and was so disruptive that it did more harm than good. And so when I started LeaderShift 12 years ago, we really started as a way to fix those things. So we started as an org design firm. We wrote RapidOD, which is an org design process that's fast, collaborative, it's sustainable, so you don't have to keep restructuring over and over again every time something changes. But what we realized is that people in corporations were just shot. I mean, they were getting beat up by the amount of change that was hitting them, and they had no way to deal with it. And so, one of the things we did was we looked at hundreds of leadership development programs, and we found two that actually drove ROI. And so we bought the rights to those, and then we wrote the third, which was really about resilience, which became a huge need that was starting to emerge, is that people were just getting beat up and they couldn't come back. I mean, they just were getting burned out. So what we figured out was that and all this is kind of related, is that if leaders were really on the same page with the strategy of the organization and they were aligned, resilience was a whole lot easier. So it's all about understanding the why. So we figured out how to do these strategy sessions that actually create alignment. And so at the same time, I was actually I was a competitive water skier for most of my early life, and I was kind of looking at my life, saying, as I got involved with NSA and speaking, I was like, what's the story that only I can tell? And so I went out and asked like 10 friends, and they all came back and said, well, you're nothing if not resilient. By that point, I had moved a couple times. I had been knocked out of training with a car accident, and I was knocked out of competition with another car accident. And then just as I was rehabbing from that, I had this major health crisis. But what I realized is that, and it does look back, what I realized is that I didn't become resilient because of those things. I was able to get through those things because I was resilient. And there were some really specific things that I did. And so as I started researching it, what I realized is that the characteristics of resilient people and resilient organizations are the same. And so for that reason, we can actually build them the same way. So all the work I was doing in organizations kind of came full circle. And now, like, I did a strategy session last week for a group of executives, and a guy, a CEO, and this team really didn't meet very often, but the CEO said to me at the end, I had them go around and talk about, what they got out of it. And he said, for the first time in 23 years, I don't feel alone. And he actually shed tears. And part of that is why I do what I do. I mean, this all comes full circle, but at the end of the day, it's all about, how do we get people on the same page and really help make the situation that people are dealing with all this change easier.
Well, I think that's a great setup to where we're going to go today and really talk to our chargers. I call my audience the chargers about today, because it's about more than just, if you're not in that business setting, maybe it's personally about being resilient. It's about all those characteristics that we have in there. And I think that's going to really set up as well. Now, I do have one question I want to ask you, because I have a mantra called CHARGE, create habits around real goals every day. I'm curious, what habit or habits do you think has led to success in your life?
Yeah, I think that's an awesome question. I'm so glad that you asked it first, because I think the biggest thing, as I really thought, it really took me some thinking to think about that. And I think the biggest thing for me is knowing your purpose in every situation before you go into it. So when you understand the purpose that you need to get out of a situation, it really changes how you deal with the situation when you're in it. So, for example, if you go into a difficult situation and someone attacks you in an argument, your reaction is going to be very, very different if your purpose is to win, which is pretty much human nature, versus if you've already thought about, I need to make sure I come out of this having preserved a relationship. So, I had a conversation the other day with some people in our neighborhood that got really personal really fast. And it was challenging for me, but through the whole thing in my head was my purpose of, these are my neighbors. I have to leave this conversation feeling good about that. And so when they attacked me, I didn't attack back. And so I think, it's kind of a silly example, but when I think about everything that I've succeeded in life, it's all because I thought about purpose before I went into a situation. And when I don't do that, I don't do so well.
Wow. And I love that answer. I've never had that before, I'll be honest, Jennifer, but it really makes you think about what is the reason, what is that purpose? So many of us have a hard time defining what is our reason for being here. And I think that's going to really, with our discussion today with resilience, you kind of talked about this, but I'm going to still ask it, because with your book, you talk about resilient isn't about bouncing back. What is it about? What is the real key that we need to take away with resilience?
Yeah, that's the most fun part for me, because when you ask people what is resilience, almost 8 out of 10 will say it's about bouncing back. But at the end of the day, and I love this quote from Carla Trotman, who's an entrepreneur and just phenomenally successful executive I know, but she says that by the time if you try to bounce back, by the time you bounce back, everything's changed. Your business environment's changed, your market's changed, et cetera. So when we look at large corporate transformation, or whether you're looking at, your own life and your divorce or your, health crisis or whatever situation you're in, if you try to go back, there's no back to bounce to. So resilience is all about moving forward and getting through disruption, energized, elevated by it, so that you come out stronger and more effective. And we do that with preparation. And that's what the book is about. It's about how do you prepare, and whether you're, so part one is really about individuals, and part two is really about how do you apply it to organizations. But what was interesting to me is we topped the self-help chart in a couple of countries. And when I set out to write the book, I set out to write a business book. So that was almost a little disconcerting when that happened. But at the end of the day, if we don't start thinking as business people about how who we are as people shapes who we are as a leader, we're never going to be resilient. So when we do workshop, it's edgy, it's in your face, right? It's like the wind in your face and you're on the edge and you're diving off the cliff. It's kind of the feeling that you get when you really dig into how who you are as a person shapes who you are as a leader. There's no way to become resilient without that.
I love that answer, because one of the things I tell my audience all the time, and I'll normally ask the question, who in this room is a leader? And the organization, of course, the people that raise their hand is the people that have the role.
That's right.
Called a leader, that's somewhere within their organization. And I tell them, sorry, that was a trick question. We should have all been raising our hand, because we're all leaders first of ourselves.
That's true.
And I think that's exactly what you're saying, is we have to look at ourselves as individuals before we can ever lead other people. And the better leaders that do that, they're more self-aware, they're more resilient in that capacity. So when you talk about it, you said you kind of had two functions there of the book, of the organizational side and the individual side. Why is it so important, do you think, as we're building that organizational resilience?
Well, I think they're both important. It's hard to build organizational resilience if the individuals in it aren't resilient. So what we present is a framework, and I'd be more than happy to share this with your listeners. But what we have is a framework around how resilience works. And if you can apply that framework to yourself as an individual, and then to create a resilient team or organization, really what you need to do is get alignment among the people in the group or the team around the exact same framework. So it's a whole lot easier if you really think about that as an individual first, so you know what you're going through. But the interesting thing is that the framework is exactly the same, but the language changes. So for example, knowing your purpose might be your mission statement, or knowing your core beliefs, individually, that might be your faith. But in an organization, that might be a value, your values that are posted on the wall in a conference room. But the idea is, how clear and aligned are the individuals in the organization to the organizational resilience framework? But that's going to be a lot easier to deal with if those people have that self-awareness. When you mention self-awareness, I think what's fascinating is that a lot of the things that we teach and present about resilience have their roots in emotional intelligence. And that is all about self-awareness. Now, it's hard to sell emotional intelligence, right? You tell someone to go to an emotional intelligence workshop, it doesn't feel so good.
I don't need that.
You can't tell someone they're not emotionally intelligent, but you can we all need to work on resilience. And frankly, we all need to work on emotional intelligence too. So exactly. It all works together. But if we look at who we are as people, and then we look at the context of the organization, it all fits together. But I think what happens instead in corporate life, and I was going to say corporate America, but this is a global problem. It's that we talk a lot about these academic notions, but we very rarely get into people's hearts and into people's heads around who they really are. And until we do that, people are going to struggle. And so it's time for corporations that are doing training to really start going deeper. And that's a lot of what we do.
Well, I understand what you say, but I'm going to have to challenge you on this. Have you seen this really work in corporations? And I know you can't give us the corporation, but you can tell us maybe some of the backstory of where you've seen this actually work, because I need an example, because that's the challenge sometimes in corporate. They don't want people to bring themselves. It's almost like they, in the past, I think this is changing. They want the robots, show up, do as we say, each and every time. So how have you seen this work? And is there an example maybe you can share that made how corporations actually that corporation made a difference because of accepting this versus saying, no, let's go with the standard norm?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think I definitely have one that comes to mind. And it's a company that I worked for. So they're, and it won't take you long to figure this out, but they're an auto parts retailer. And so the really interesting thing is that if you know retail, you know that shiny new stores create a surge in revenue, right? So retail companies really depend on the ability to introduce new stores and new markets and things like that. And so this particular company one year, and this was long enough ago that I think I could probably share it. They, around about July, so they had a new store opening goal of 333 stores. Round about July, the guy in charge of store openings figured out that they were only going to open about 250. So you can imagine, I mean, the scramble that ensued, and that when he had to go to the leadership team and share the fact that he wasn't going to meet his goal, which meant everybody's bonus was impacted. I mean, if you could just imagine what that conversation might have been like. But the neat thing is that at this particular company, whatever you imagined and the chaos and the arguments and the fighting and the blame and all of that could have happened anywhere else didn't happen there. Because these people, and most of their executives had actually gone through the program, these folks came in and there was no fighting, there was no debate, there was no struggle. They really didn't even need a meeting. And what happened was they left the room, and the head of sales went out and he ran some promotions and he got his people in gear and they made up part of the gap. And then the head of merchandising went out and they put the screws to some vendors and they got some other deals and tightened up some contracts and they helped bridge part of the gap. And then supply chain came in and they made sure that they were able to get higher margin products to the stores faster. And even HR came in and they ran training programs and they accelerated the knowledge of the folks in the store, and they got better qualified associates in the stores they already had. And what was fascinating is they had two metrics. As an organization, they had two metrics that every single person from the frontline associate to the CEO were incented by. And at the end of that year, because everyone was aligned and they were really a resilient place, they met bonus paid out that year at 100% for every single employee, because they didn't have any internal competition. There were no hidden agendas. They all came together. And that's what resilience is in corporate America. And frankly, it is not that hard to create. I mean, we're talking, a couple days and a bit of discipline. Like, this is just not, well, okay, maybe a lot of discipline, but a bit of commitment, right? That's right. If you want to create this, it doesn't just make a difference for you, and it'll change your life, but it makes a difference for every single person in that organization. And I was there at the time. I don't remember anyone being burned out. I don't remember anyone complaining about change fatigue. And frankly, most of those people are still there. They don't spend a lot on recruiting because that's a place where people want to be. And that's what resilience does for corporations.
Is a part of this really have to be, I just got done reading the book Dare to Lead by Brene Brown, with having those vulnerable conversations, having that open communication. And I mean, I know for myself, when I get called in, I do more small businesses, but I think trends that are in small businesses relate right up to corporations. And they always tell me something else is going on within the organization. But the interesting part is 90% of the time, it's about the lack of communication or lack of open communication that's there. Do you see that same thing in some of the organizations you work with?
Yeah, you're 100% correct. And frankly, that's usually where we start. I mean, we have a 3-course mastery series that starts with our influence workshop. And that program is about 90%, a bit of adaptive leadership, but it's about 90% not convince you should have a difficult conversation, but actually teach you how to do it. And we provide tools to help people actually have those interactions, because if we can't get real issues on the table out where they can be solved, you'll spin your wheels forever. I mean, this is why companies stall, because they don't have those conversations. And I think the organizations with the biggest struggle here are the ones that'll tell me, well, we're a family organization, or, we have, name the company, like fill in the blank, right? Company nice. So they have this nice culture. Well, nice just means we don't tell each other the truth and we don't have real candid conversations. And so to me, that's not nice, right? Nice is when you tell somebody the truth and you move on and you don't have all these hidden agendas and all this nonsense in your head that you're thinking but not saying. So what we help people do is get the thought, when you have a conversation, we have a tool called the right-hand, left-hand column. And in one column, in the right-hand column, is all the things that are said out loud. And in the left-hand column, and this is, take a page from, I think, Peter Senge, on the left column is all the things that you're thinking but not saying. You can't say all of those things exactly the way you're thinking them, but the question is, how can you get the majority of what's in your left-hand column out so that you're really having a dialogue that creates learning for both parties? And I think that is ticket to entry when it comes to building resilience and creating alignment. Now, there's lots more to say about creating alignment, but if we can't have those conversations where we invite dissent and create learning, there's no way to create alignment. We have to start there.
I agree with you there. Now, you wrote the book and it came out this summer, and we write books for different reasons. I'm sure part of it is it shares your message and your framework. Some of the interesting things you said, you found out that even individuals kind of really was the first part of it, and then organizations, the second part. What's the one thing you would tell us about the book that really, that you're hearing back, some of the feedback that you're hearing from either organizations or individuals about your book?
Yeah, I'm shocked, actually. The feedback has been, much better than I ever would have expected. We've got a lot of great feedback from people who said, there's so much in here I can relate to. I mean, I had a CEO email me last week that said, there's stuff in here that I know I do, and there's stuff in here that I know I should have done, right? And so I think people are finding themselves in the book. So it's a fairly easy read. We've gotten feedback that it's an easy read. I'm not sure I didn't realize that when we did it. So, and we've even had, I have my art teacher, for example, is probably the biggest fan of the book. She runs an art class gallery business, and she found a ton in it that she was able to resonate with. So, I think no matter where you are in life or in your career, I think there's something in there that you'll find helpful. The self-help nature of it certainly was maybe a little more surprising than I expected, but the feedback I think on that is that I'm used to that in the workshops. There's a workshop based on the book. So the workshop, we always get these very powerful, breakthroughs that come out of that, but I didn't expect it from people reading the book. And I think we have gotten quite a bit of that. So I think that's been the most fun. I think that's been the most fun. And I tried to really link it to the academic research as well. And, I thought that was going to be maybe more important than it is. But the beginning kind of starts with how resilience drives adaptive leadership. And I think that was just an interesting thing, but I don't think it stood out to as many people that read the book as I thought it would.
Well, thank you for that, because one thing I love about it is when people say the book, and you found that out, that they can put themselves into it. Of course, number one, what happens? Learning goes way up. We know that in a training or a facilitating, when they start to put themselves into it, of course, they can start changing their habits, disciplines, behaviors, all the things that really makes the changes happen. So I guess my next question is, we've talked around these, but I think we've got to come back to it because it's getting about that time that we're going to have to start wrapping up to go to the recharge round. But before we do, what are some things, either the number one thing someone can do to build resilience, or what's the top 3 things that really someone really has to work on if they want to build that resilience?
Yeah, there's a number of things, and I actually I had some of this kind of in my notes for the recharge round, but I'll leap ahead and say that the framework, I can't share the graphic on the podcast, but I'd be more than happy to email it to anybody that wants it with some tools that we're building as well. But resilience, there's a framework. So resilience is really about your mindset and the choices that you make. And underlying those two things are your core beliefs. Now, your mindset is made up of authenticity and attitude. And so those are really things that you can work on. Your choices are made up of your purpose and your definition of success. So I talked a little bit about purpose. I think of purpose as your purpose in a situation, where your definition of success is a little bit more like how do you know when you're being who you really want to be? And so those are things that people typically don't think about. And so we recommend, some strong preparation in that space and really doing some soul searching there. Core beliefs are another one that, when that comes up in a corporate workshop, people are always a little taken aback. But, individually, you can call that your faith if you want. But what becomes important is when you're in a tough situation, it is almost impossible to stand up when you don't know what you're standing on. Now, it doesn't matter to me if that's the Buddha, the rabbit's foot, Jesus, or whatever it is for you. But the important thing is that without a shadow of a doubt, what you stand on. And so because that's the underlying piece, I would say the number one thing you can do to build resilience is figure out what you stand for, what you stand on, and what your core beliefs are.
I love that. And I think that becomes the key. And that helps us. It doesn't matter if you're an individual, as you're working in an organization, same thing. Because if your organization makes you stand for something that you're not, well, maybe that's the time you need to look for a new career.
Yeah, absolutely.
New opportunity, because you're not going to be happy in that situation. And it's really the same thing that we need in our family life and our personal life. If we have a family, what do we stand for as a group? Trying to identify that in each one of those areas. Well, some great information. Jennifer, I think now's a perfect time before we go into the recharge round. Share with them how they can get the book. And because that is a definite must read or a must listen to if you prefer the Audible side. So you can share that, and also any information on how they can reach out to you.
Sure, absolutely. So so first of all, we're working on a tool set that is going to kind of go along with the book, and there'll be three big tools that we're going to be more than happy to share. So if someone emails me, I'm more than happy to put you on the list, and we'll get that out to you. My email is jeggers, JEGGERS, @lsiteam.com. So L as in Larry, S as in Sam, I as in Igloo, the word team.com. The book is Resilience. It's Not About Bouncing Back. It's available on Amazon, or we would prefer if you go to our website, leadershiftinsights.com/resilience-book. So that's another, and only because we can tell you a little bit about the book, and you can see if that's a fit. But the other alternative is always Amazon. That works too. But more than happy to, if you're thinking about, what do you need to do to become a resilient organization or an individual, and you want to talk about next steps, feel free to reach out. More than happy to talk about that. And again, happy to share our tools that are coming out, and the resilience framework as well. Just email me to get it.
So don't worry, Chargers. If you didn't get that, we will have that in show notes. So you can go to show notes. They'll be there. Chris does a great job making sure everything is listed out there for you to be able to access that information. So know that's available to you. All you have to do is go to chargepodcast.com, and we'll have all that in show notes. Before we wrap up, let's go to the recharge round. I like asking these questions of each individual. And like you said, we got maybe a preempt, but part of the reason I ask these questions is really to find out from other people. I have a framework, just like Jennifer has a framework of what she shares with her audience and the people that she works with, why we think these are so important. So my first one is, share with us why you believe mindset affects your daily living all the time.
Yeah, this is huge. And to me, I think of it as pre-work versus rework. Right? You either prepare ahead of time or we're scrambling afterwards. So we're either resilient or we're coping. And what we don't want to end up is in that situation where you're just coping and trying to get through things. The preparation is what's required to really be resilient, so that you can come back faster, more energized and elevated after disruption. So I think the mindset to me that affects your daily life is how willing are you to be prepared and get clear on some of these things ahead of time.
Oh, that's a great answer. And I love that. Pre-work or rework? That is one that I'm going to remember, and I wrote it down so I remember it.
Well, and if you don't have time to do the pre-work, you'll never have time to do the rework.
That's exactly right.
That's the focus. That's the feedback we get a lot is, oh, this takes so much time. Well, you want to do it now or do you want to do it later?
That's right.
That's the question.
I love it. And this one kind of plays into that, because what do you do daily to bring energy in your life? And I always tell people, maybe you think about it, because the days, we're doing a podcast. We love doing this and speaking to other people, so it's a little bit easier. But let's use those times when our energy is a little bit low. What's some of the strategies that you use to bring your energy up?
Yeah, I think you name a great one. Just in talking to other people that care about this stuff, I think that's number one. The second thing I do, I make it a practice to take one day a week of complete downtime. And so that doesn't mean go hiking and walk in the woods. That means really, truly do nothing. And it might be sitting at the pool. It might be sitting on the couch. But one day a week, absolute downtime. I'm a better person for it. You could have fooled me when I started it, but I had a couple people recommend it, and I thought, well, we'll try this, and I'll tell you what, I'm a healthier person for it.
And that's a key one. I've heard that before, and Dan Sullivan really talks about that, is 24 hours totally away from. That means no checking email. Of course, our phones, of course, is our family life, those type of things. But you're either turning off the email if you can't turn it off, and just staying away from those things. It really is a recharger. I love that example there. Share the number one connection. It could be a relationship or just connection that's made the biggest impact on your life.
Oh my gosh, that's my co-author. I mean, Cynthia Barlow, she's just phenomenal. So Cindy runs a company called Constellation Learning up in Toronto, Canada. She led a workshop. So the life-changing part for me was she wrote a program and led a program called the Trust Program. I attended the program in 1997. And to this day, I look at my life as life before and life after that event. It was that powerful. She still does the Trust Program. She's put thousands of people through it. I mean, it's just an absolutely life-changing experience. And I think as a result of that experience, Cindy and I became friends and colleagues, and, we put our heads together on the book. And I think she's probably the single, biggest influence on me in terms of just real true impact on your life. I mean, she's one of these people that, you don't talk about the weather with Cindy. I mean, you get right to something real that's important and just a really impactful person.
Well, thank you for sharing that. What advice has influenced you the most in your life?
Yeah, and some of this came from Cindy too. I would say the biggest advice is it's all life, right? There's no work-life balance. You can't compartmentalize it and expect to manage it. And I think, early in my career, I really did a lot of compartmentalizing. And I think one day Cindy said to me, you can't live in these little neat compartments. It just doesn't work that way. And it wasn't until I started breaking down those barriers and really work is my life. And somebody said to me, what do you do to have fun? Well, a lot of my work is fun. So I don't feel like I have to go stop and go do something else, because I don't do stuff that doesn't, I won't say it all is energizing, but there's always stuff you don't like. But I think by and large, the more you can integrate and not compartmentalize your family and your work and your business and all the pieces of your life, the better off you'll be.
Yeah, I love that. And I have come up with the phrase, and I've heard it before, but from multiple people, but instead of work-life balance, it's about work-life integration. That's
absolutely
what life is about, is how can we integrate those two together? When those two coexist and we enjoy both sides, I mean, that's when you bring your best self to work all the time.
It really is.
Recommend a book and share why you love it.
Well, mine, of course, since I've been neck deep in it for the last 2 years, and it's finally at a place I'm pretty proud of. So yeah. I'd be remiss if I didn't recommend that. But, I have to say, I heard 2 of your other podcast guests recommend Daring Greatly. I actually really like Brene Brown's Gifts of Imperfection. I think that's probably my favorite of hers. But my favorite business book of all time is The Obstacle is the Way by Ryan Holiday. And I think what I really like about that book is that he has figured out a way to explain that all of these things that happen to us, all this disruption that happens in our lives, it's not like you're going through life and then this happens and it's an exception. You use the obstacle as the way. So resilience is a lot about that, right? You're using the disruption to actually get stronger and get better. And so in the book, we present the filter, which is hard to do in a few seconds, but we suggest that people view life through the lens of life is hard. Because the minute and it's not optimism or pessimism, the minute you start thinking that life is hard, it suddenly ceases to be hard because you don't expect it to be easy anymore. And that's where I think Ryan really gets into that with the obstacle is the way. The obstacle isn't the exception. It's just the way you get great. And I think that's what resilience is all about.
Oh, I love that. Thank you for sharing that. And we will have that in show notes also. Last question for you. You've almost made it through the recharge round. One sentence or less. What legacy do you want to leave the world?
Oh gosh, I want to make life in corporations better. I mean, less stressful, more fulfilling. It just doesn't have to be this hard.
Oh, now that's a big job you've got ahead of you, but I know if anyone can do it, Jennifer can do it. I tell you, Jennifer, we can't thank you enough for being on the Charge podcast. Share one more time the website that they can go to and the name of your book so they can pick up a copy if they'd like to.
Sure, absolutely. The book is called Resilience. It's not about bouncing back, how leaders and organizations can build resilience before disruption hits. And the website is www.leadershiftinsights.com. And my email, feel free to reach out, is jeggers@lsiteam.com. LeaderShiftInsights.com works too, but we'll give you the short one if you don't want to write that down.
Sounds great. No, that's in the Charge Podcast under show notes that we'll have that available to you. So you can go to chargepodcast.com. Jennifer, we can't thank you enough because I think the quote that I want to really leave people with, it's all life. It's all life. Our work, our home, our personal life, all those things come together. At Chargers, we're all trying to get that. And you've given us something that we can walk away realizing that obstacles are part of the way. And I just can't thank you enough for being on the Charge Podcast. Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me. I had a blast. So thank you so much, and great job. This is a really neat podcast. I appreciate it.
Well, thanks, Jennifer, for saying yes. Chargers, we thank you for listening in. Now, remember, rate and review and share the podcast with others. And don't forget, you can get your 7 days of charge for all the listeners of the Charge podcast. We offer a program called 7 Days of Charge, absolutely free. The program will take you just a few minutes each day, but it can drastically change your life. To get this free program, head over to positiveculturewins.biz and sign up, and you will start getting the 7 emails. There's one a day for 7 days to be able to make that change. Chargers, we're so glad you joined us again this week. We'll see you back here next week. Make it a great day.
This podcast is ended, but your life doesn't just stop. To continue your inspiring journey, head over to chargepodcast.com and access all the tools and resources mentioned on today's show. If you enjoyed this episode, consider sharing with somebody who may also benefit from the advice provided. That's chargepodcast.com. Until next time, charge in business and life.